So we are discussing about the Sling model. So Sling model is nothing but the POJO classes only. There you will see the variables and the method. But the unique thing is it will automatically map with your Sling object. So Sling object is nothing but your resource and the request. So we already know that resource. So consider here we have a content folder in our CRXD. So whatever it will store inside this content folder, this is nothing but your resource. This is nothing but your resource only, and this content is nothing but the controller as well. So only when this path will render, okay, the first word is a content and after that some path will render, only then you will get the answer, otherwise you won't get the answer. So this one is nothing but your controller. Okay, and another thing, here we have another backend concept. Okay, another backend concept we have, that is OHGI service. Okay, one OHGI service we have, this is the backend code, and if you want to include this backend code in your Sling model, you can include it. Okay, but this is the Sling model, it's entirely annotation based. So this one is a pure annotation based, so that means whatever you want to do it, so for that you have to use the annotation. Okay, and it will support to both classes and as well as the interfaces. Okay, it will support to the both, and all the interfaces, sorry, all the annotations they have already created, that is nothing but the out of the box. Okay, now just come here, and first one is your model annotations. Now consider you have simply a one class. This is the class you have, public class, and this is nothing but your A class. Okay, this is the class. Now you want to convert into one Sling model. How you can convert it? How we can recognize this class is nothing but the Sling model? So for that we just simply have to use this at the rate model annotations. So this is the model we have to use. So once you will write this, that means your this class will convert into an Sling model. Okay, and here we have one option, one attribute, that is adaptables. So this is the option, this is the attribute we have, that is adaptables. So now your class is adapting as a resource. Okay, now that means you can get the resource easily. Okay, this class will treat as a resource only. Instead of that, in this adaptables you can, here we have a lot of adaptable, but mostly we'll use two. Here second I'm just typing Sling HTTP servlet request. This is the second one, Sling HTTP servlet request. Okay, that we discuss later, this resource.class and the Sling HTTP servlet.class. But now just simple, this is the class, and this class if you want to convert into one Sling model, for that we have to use this at the rate model. Okay, that's nice. And for the interface as well, so here we have an interface, and this is the name of the interface, the same thing, but here we have to use a at the rate model. That's it. After that, here we have a required and the optional. So basically the mainly we are using a Sling model, like inside that, inside your CRXD, inside your CRXD we knows that what we have a node, and inside this node we have a properties. Is it all the properties we have inside the CRXD only? And that property, like here we have a CQ dialog. Okay, here we have a CQ dialog, and user simply writing a data inside these fields, and once user has submitted this CQ dialog, all this data automatically will store in a properties. So there we have defined one name variable, sorry, name properties we have defined. Okay, and using this name property, all this data it is storing inside the properties. Is it okay? After that, so this is the data. So user has written some data here, just like a text it has written, just like a 10 and 20 they have written here. Okay, so this data will store inside your properties, and this is the property we are fetching using a Sling model. Using this Sling model we are fetching the properties. So why we are fetching these properties? So for this particular properties, if you want to perform any business logic, then you can simply fetch this property in your Sling model. But we knows that for that we have to use this at the rate model. But so here I have defined the property. Here you see, like this is the path I need, and this is the title I need. So user has entered in the CQ dialog this path, and this is the title he has entered it. Now I need this both, but consider in this name, so maybe a name we have, and inside this name dot slash, and we'll define the variable like this. This is the rule to define a variable, is it? Okay, when user inside the CQ dialog, when it will write something, okay, so this data will, where it will store inside this path. Okay, in this path it will store. So what is the name? This is the path. This one, this resource name and this Java name should be same. This both name should be same, otherwise it won't map with this path, with this variable, with this Java variable. So this one is nothing but your node variable, okay, and this one is your Java variable. This is the node property, and this one is your Java properties. Okay, and after that, now you want this one. So from the crxd, you need inside the Java. Okay, so how we can get it? So by using one annotation, that is @inject. So this is the annotation is responsible if you need the crxd, that means nodes or the resources in this Java node. Okay, so for that what we use? @inject will use. But another thing is there, that is optional. Here we have an annotation that is optional and the required. By default, when you are going to the CQ dialog, consider this is your CQ dialog. Okay, and here we have a more than one field. Here we have a lot of fields. Okay, and here user is writing a data, and unfortunately user has forget, and he hasn't write inside this field. So by default what it will happen? It will store the null value. Okay, and whenever the null value will store inside this particular title or this particular path, so it will throws the null pointer exception. So when you will deploy, you will get the null pointer exception. So for that, this is not a good thing, and by default it's all properties are the required, this variable are the required, we have to write, otherwise it will throw the null pointer exception. Got it? So simply, if it is throwing a null pointer exception and by default it's a required, that means every property we have to define some value, then you can simply use the optional. If you don't want the required, then you can define here optional. But if you need some of the property it is a required, then don't need to mention this one. But still, if you want, then you can mention here @required. Did you get it? Okay. So here we have a optional. By default, all the field it's a required. But still, if you want some of the field as a optional, then you can define this. That is optional. But now here we have 1,000 field. Consider we have 1,000 variables here. So every time we have to go there and we have to write @optional, @optional, @optional. No. If you don't want these types of concept, then you can simply define as a class level. Okay, simply class level you can define. Here we have another property. The first one, that is adaptable, is equals to resource.class. Give a comma here, and after that define their default injection strategy. Default injection strategy, and same thing, same name, but these D capital. Default injection strategy, default injection strategy dot optional. So once you will define like this, so all your field will be optional. Okay, and some of the field if you need a required, then you can go there and just simply type @required. That's it. After, here we have one method. We have a one method. Okay, and this is @post construct. This is not a method, this is the annotation. This is basically the annotation. And okay, and this one is not related to the injections. So basically, now this annotation, why we are using it? If you want to define any method, okay, if you want to define the methods inside the inside your Sling model, then we have to use this post construct. Then this method will execute automatically. But if you are trying to define your own method and you are not using this @post construct, and consider this is the method you have defined, this method won't execute. Why? Because we knows that in the Sling model or in our AEM, in the backend code, we will not create the object. That's it. Object will create automatically the OSGI Sling framework. for us. Okay, we will never create the object, but in our Java, firstly we'll create the object, and after that we'll call this method like object dot say hello, like this will call, no? Okay, so here we want do like that. So if you want to execute any method and you want to return all the logic inside this method, for that we have to use this post construct annotation. But there is a rule. So firstly what it will do, so when you are using at the rate inject, and here we have a string, consider we have a fname field, and after that here at the rate inject, and again I'm just defining a string, and this time we have a L name. Otherwise, this is the number 2 and this is the number 1. This is the number 1 and this one is the number 2. And this is the addition you are doing inside this method. Inside this method, you are doing the additions of number 1 plus number 2. Okay. So what it will happen is, firstly, it will inject all the properties from your CRXD. First of all, it will inject all the properties from your CRXD, and after that it will call this method. This method won't call before injections of this variable. It will call after the injections of this method. Why? Because sometimes we'll use the fields or the variable inside this method, and if this variables is a null, then it will throws the null pointer exception. So this is not a good. Okay, so that's why it will, when you will define this at the rate post construct, so it will inject, or this method will call after the injections of this all the fields. Got it? After that, here we have a inject. So already we knows that. So this inject will use when we want to fetch the resources, or when we want to fetch the properties. Okay, so like consider at the rate inject I have, and in the CQ dialog I have defined one f name. Okay, and one variable I have defined by using a name dot slash f name. Okay, and inside this field user has defined something just like a search it has defined. So inside this f name, what it will store? This search name, is it? And this should be a same. What is the type? F name, it must be a string, so we have to use the string here, string f name. This should be same. This and that one both need should be same. Both should be same, otherwise it won't map with each others. Got it? Okay, so this thing is done now. So what we are doing, here, so we are retrieving, or we are fetching the properties from our CRSD in our backend code. Okay, so that's why we are using this at the rate inject. But not only for the properties, if you want the resource type or some out of the box functionality in your AEM, you can you can use this at the rate inject, not only for the properties, but some of the out of the box API it has created. Now some of the out of the box API is created just like a query builder. One service is there, and this is nothing but the class only. So if you want this class, okay, so you can simply use this at the rate inject. If you need a resource resolver, if you need a resource, then still you can use this at the rate inject. Got it? Later we have a default. Now consider this is the property name I have. That means you can consider this is the f name. Okay, this is the inside of this property name I have defined here f name. Okay, and unfortunately user hasn't entered the proper information. Okay, so in the inside this f name field, user hasn't entered anything. So what it will happen, inside this variable, the somewhere we have created the variable, that is f name. Okay, so inside this variable what it will store? Null. So when it will store the null, so inside this f name as well in the Java it will store the null. Okay, and if you are performing, if you are trying to calculate the length or something, okay, to this particular string, then it will throws the null pointer exception. So this is not a good thing. So for that, if you don't want like that, then you can just simply use this at the rate default. So if user hasn't entered anything, then by default you can store this value. This is the value, this is the value you can store inside this variable or inside this fname variable. Not only the one, if you need more than one, like array, then you can simply use curly braces open and the close, and you can define the array. Okay, more than one value you can store, and after that, automatically whatever it's after that, after this line, whatever it is, so it will store inside this variable. Okay, so this 1 2 3 4 5 6, it will store inside this my array. Okay, later that we have a at the rate name annotation. So why we use a at the rate name annotation? So we knows that we have one property that is Sling colon resource type. As we knows that we have this property that is Sling colon resource type. And I have already mentioned like this property, and if I need this one in my Java code, in my Java code, I need this Sling colon resource type. So what I have said, both should be same. So we have to define the same thing, just like a Sling resource type. Okay, but we knows that this one wants support to our Java. Okay, we cannot define the variable like Sling colon resource type. But there is one criteria or one rule, both need to be same. We knows that. So your this CRXD property or your Java property need to be same. Okay, but Java says we cannot define the variable Sling colon resource type. We cannot define the variable like this string, and after that if you are trying to define Sling colon resource type, it's not possible. So for that you can simply use the name property. It is also used for the mapping. So like consider simply here, now you want this Sling resource type, you can simply use at the rate name, and after that inside this you can use a Sling colon Sling colon resource type. Sling colon resource type. So automatically what it will happen now, so here if you have one variable just like a private string, and here I'm just defining Sling resource type. So this is the variable I have defined. So automatically now whatever value we have inside this property, this value will come under this Sling resource type. Okay, so by using this name, if you want to map this property with this variable, then you can simply use this name annotations. Do you guys have any issue in this? Yeah. Okay, now we'll discuss about the via. Okay, before the via, here we have a script variable. Okay, so initially we knows that we have one for making our class or the simple class. If you want to convert into a Sling model, for that we have to use one annotation that is at the rate model, and inside that we have a one attribute that is adaptables. There we have one attribute that is adaptables equals to, and we have to adapt two things. Mostly we'll use resource dot class, otherwise we'll use a Sling HTTP servlet request. Sling HTTP servlet request dot class. You can use anyone from both of this. Okay, but some of the annotation, just like this script variable. So this is the annotation. It has injected with this Sling HTTP servlet request. And your default annotation, default, we have a name annotation, we have a inject annotation. This annotation, it has related to this resource dot class. So if you need to use some of the annotations, so for that you have to define the resource, and these types of annotation if you want to use, then you have to define this Sling HTTP servlet request. Got it? Sling HTTP servlet request we have to define. But why we are using this script variable and why we are using this Sling HTTP servlet request? So basically, Adobe has provided out of the box global object. That means we don't need to create the objects or anything. They have already provided. Maybe a 20 or 30 annotations we have on the internet. Okay, so these are the objects that is nothing but the global objects. So if you need like page you need it. So page or the page methods you need, then you can simply use this page manager. Okay, here we have a page manager. If you are performing the CRUD operation on the page, then you can simply use this page manager. So this is the object they have already created. So if you need page related things, then you can simply use this page manager. Like if you want to print something on the resultant page, then you can simply use the print writer. So like that wise, they have uses lot of implicit object they have already created, or you can say global object. So if you want to use this global object, you can simply use this script variable annotations. This is the script variable annotations we have to use. And we have another, that is Sling object. So this is the Sling object. So if you want to use the Sling related object, like inside our global object, we have a Sling related object as well. Okay, so just like come here and you will see somewhere Sling. Inside that, whatever, somewhere we have a Sling where it is. Yeah. So this is the Sling we have. Okay. So this request resolver and this resource. Okay. So these are nothing but the Sling related annotations. So if you want to use that one, you can simply use this @Sling object. Here you see Sling object. Here we have a resource. Sling object. Here we have a resource resolver. Okay. And here script variable we have. So if you need the page related things or something else, page manager, then you can simply use this script variable. And we have a two things. What basically, when we will adapt, so we'll adapt two things: Sling HTTP servlet request and resource dot resource dot class. And we already knows that some annotation will support to this resource dot class and some annotation will support to this Sling HTTP servlet request. But still, if you have uses this Sling HTTP servlet request, okay, and your inject will support to this resource dot class, then in that case you can simply mention @via. So right now we are in the Sling HTTP servlet request, but now this annotation I'm using, and this annotation is related to this resource.class resource.class, then you can simply use this @via, and here you can mention this resource. Here later that we have a self annotation. So we have a Sling model 1 you have already created, and we have a Sling model 2. If Sling model 1, if you want to inject inside the Sling model 2, then you can simply use this @self annotation. So this is the annotation we have to use. Okay. Later that here we have a resource path. Resource path. So now inside our properties, now consider we have a F name, we have a L name, and we have a Sling resource type. And inside the Sling resource type, this value should be stored in the form of path. Is it? So this first name, it will store only in the form of string. Last name, it will store in the form of string only. But Sling resource type, it will store in the form of path. Okay, so maybe you have a apps, and inside the apps you have a core and WCM, and after the WCM you have a component, and inside this component maybe you have a title component. So this is nothing but the path only, no? So if you want the path related things directly, you can use this @resource path annotations. Okay, so here you see now. So by default, if you want to add this path, this is the path you want to add it. Okay, so you can simply use the resource path annotation, and this path, it will automatically store inside this variable. And here I have defined the array. Why? Because here I have uses the curly braces. If you are not using the curly braces, remove this, and you can simply define here like this resource path. Got it? Easy. After that, here we have a child resource. Anyone knows about the multi-field? So when you will create a multi-field, okay, so consider this is our multi-field, and inside this multi-field we have a lot of fields. Lot of fields we have. It may be, and inside that will store the items, and it may be a F name, it may be a L name, it may be your date of birth, or it may be your text. So lot of fields we have. Is it? So it's the four or five fields we have. Okay, and all these thing where it is storing inside this container. And where is this container storing? Inside our multi-field. Okay, so here inside this multi-field, when you will define composite is equals to true, composite boolean is equals to true. So what it will does is, so first of all, this is your first iteration. This is nothing but your first iteration. What actually meaning of the multi-field? So it will give the options. You can add this content more than one. So number of times you can add this content. So this content will store in one variable only. This content will store only in the one variable. So some consider multi-field variable we have. Inside this variable only this entire code will store. Okay, but sometimes you don't want to store this code, you want to store this code separately. Okay, then you can simply use this composite is equals to true. So what it will does, so firstly it will create, that means right now we are in the title component. Consider inside the title component it will create a multi-field. Okay, and inside this multi-field it will create a item 0, okay, item 1 and item 2 it will create, and after that it will store the content inside that. So this is the content will store in the item 0. If you have created the item 1, so inside this one again it will store, and this item 2. So these types of iteration it will store like this. Okay, so here first of all what we have a title, is it? Later that we have a multi-field there, multi-field there, and after that here we have a item 0, item 1 and last item 2. Okay, all our actual data it has stored inside the item 0, item 1 and item 2. I need that one, but where we are right now inside this title, but I need this data, how I can get it? So for that we have to use this child resource. So these are nothing but the resources only. Right now we are pointing in the title, we are pointing to this title, but still if you need this item 0, item 1 and item 2, so for that you have to use this child resource. Got it? So it has mentioning like this is the content I need. So this is the path or this is the resource it will store inside this child. So maybe instead of this we will say like I need a multi-field. So this multi-field will store inside this child. That's it. And from this child you can get the path, you can get the title, or you can get anything. Okay. Here we have a resource attribute annotations. What is this? Resource attribute annotation. So consider you have a HTL. HTL is nothing but the, you we can say it has embedded in our HTML. So it is a part of the HTML only. This is the part of the HTML only. So inside this HTML you have written something, okay, or some data you have written, and you want to pass this data to your Java code. So inside this HTML you have written some code and you want to pass this data to your Java code. So for that you can simply use this request attribute. So for that we have to use this request attribute, and here we have a name and the color. So this color will store inside this param. Okay, so this is the color is nothing but the key. Here it's a key and the value, but in our HTML here this is nothing but the key, and inside this key we have stored some value. So when you will call this color, automatically inside this it will store the value. Got it? Sling object we have already discussed, and this one is will use mostly. This is the value map value will use mostly because mostly we are working on the properties. So here inside the properties, like consider you have a f name, l name, sling, who, primary type, and CQ last modify. These are the properties we have. Okay, and directly you need these properties, then you can simply use this value map value. Don't use this at the rate inject. Don't use this at the rate inject. Nowadays it has deprecating. Okay, don't use this one. Instead of that you can use this value map value. Okay, so here you see somewhere you will see this value map value. Where it is? Where it is? It's not there. Okay, so we'll try to define the code. will try to define the code for the value map value. You can simply use a value map value. You can simply use the value map value. Okay, that's it. This is the annotation we have used. Now we need a f name. So you can simply type this f name. That's it. Okay, and with that annotation, if you don't want to use this default, sorry, if you don't want to use this name annotation, okay, basically name is used for the mapping. Okay, if you don't want to use, you can simply use this value map value and you can define the name here. So I need a Sling resource type. So all your Sling resource type data will store inside this variable. That's it. Okay, and at the last we have a Sling model exporter. Why we use this is also one types of annotations. Okay, and recently they have introduced this one. So basically this is the Sling model code we have. Lot of code we have inside this Sling model, and now this code you want to transfer to a third party. You want to deliver this code to a third party. So how we can deliver?